I got directed to a list of questions for those that accept evolution. Any bets if this will be the one that'll give compelling reasons to change my mind? Nah. Let's take a look.
I reject evolutionist cosmology for two chief reasons. First, I believe the Bible. Second, I'm against violence, especially when it is exalted to the source and mean of life.
I will agree that violence can sometimes be a part of evolution. Being able to thrive sometimes comes at the expense of other organisms. Nature, red in tooth and claw and all that. Nothing is being exalted, observing that nature is violent, and organisms adapting in response to that violence is a cornerstone of evolution. Honestly, the fact is that science doesn't care what you or I like. I'm against violence too, but that doesn't mean that I'll say that I don't believe that the explosive reaction of gunpowder doesn't launch projectiles after a school shooting, or say that since I'm horrified by the massive death tolls at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that nuclear theory is bunk. We don't get to choose what science is accurate if we don't like the implications. Evidence is what's needed to determine what's true, even if we don't like it.
Where are the fossils of the transitional forms? The historical problem. If the evolutionist story of millions of years of gradual transition from one form to another is true, the evidence of these transitions ought to be everywhere. To my knowing, they are not.
First off, it has to be noted that not every organism will become fossilized. First off, it has to be noted that not every organism become fossilized. It's a rare process that takes specialized circumstances. There are probably entire species that never become fossilized that we'll never know about. However, due to the vast number of organisms that ever lived, even a rare process like fossilization has left us with a plethora of transitional fossils that we can use to work out our evolutionary past. So, we have knowledge of many transitional forms. Are we done? Good. In fact, strictly speaking, we are transitional forms. If you have children, then you're the transitional form between them and your parents. Humans have around 64 to 128 mutations between each generation. Now, this may sound like a lot, but when you consider the complexity of the human genome and how many of these will be neutral changes, slight differences to eye or hair color, this does not make much difference, although over generations, these differences will begin to add up.
How does the eye evolve? The problem of irreducible complexity. The viability of so many biological systems completely depends on other systems. A fully formed eye does no good if there is no optic nerve. The optic nerve is no help if the brain cannot sort out the signals. If one of 100 things go wrong, the entire system is a detriment to life.
Gradually. We don't say that the eyeball just formed on its own and the optic nerve formed separately. Finds like the Burgess Shale can show us the simpler eyes of organisms from 500 million years ago. Our best understanding is that eyes evolved starting with a simple light-sensitive patch on unicellular organisms. Just determining light versus dark, or the direction of where light is coming from, would be an invaluable boon to these organisms, helping them thrive over their competitors. As time goes on and these organisms become more and more complex, these light-sensitive patches become more and more specialized. As organisms grow larger, the connection between the proto-eye and the nervous system becomes larger and more complex, resulting in the complicated optic nerve connecting the eye to the brain. According to scientists, if this light-sensitive patch only improved 1/2 of 1/100th of 1% every generation, it would take a little over 1/3 of a million years to evolve modern-day eyes, a drop in the bucket compared to how long life has been on Earth.
Are there examples of increasing genetic complexity? The genetic problem. I have never seen an example of mutation resulting in increased genetic complexity. Each example my biology books gave of mutation was a manifestation of traits already contained in the genetic code. I'm particularly interested to see if there is something to read on this question.
Well, the eye that we just talked about. It went from being a simple light-sensitive patch to a more complex organ able to determine a multitude of visual input, extremely useful for many organisms. For a different example, there are the Lenski experiments. In this, Various strains of E. coli were separated and observed for over 20 years. A mutation in one batch allowed them to take the citric base they were stored in and allowed them to ingest it. In other words, they became more complex. Not much more complex, mind you, but evolution is all about small changes adding up to major ones.
How did we get from no life to life? The gap problem. Some things are not in a continuity. You can slowly progress from one thing to another. There is nothing between life and not life. It's a gap, a jump. How did we make the jump? There are other gaps as well. One cell to two cells, which is non-reproducing to reproducing. Unconscious to conscience.
First off, and I've lost track of how many times I've had to say this, but that's not evolution. Evolution deals with how organisms change. Abiogenesis deals with how life first formed. There have been several theories. Jeremy England's work is the one I side with, but we may never know for sure. We can be confident that somehow life began, and after that is when Darwinian evolution started. This new life would then change in order to survive and thrive. Becoming multicellular, i.e. not splitting apart completely, can give a bonus to survival. Once organisms have cells that do not split apart completely, some cells can begin to do specific tasks for the organism. In the same way that we don't have a single organ, but rather multiple ones to pump blood, digest food, filter poisons and such, a multicellular organism will thrive because different cells can do different jobs for the entire organism. A kind of proto-multicellular organism is Volvox. It's a kind of algae that lives in spherical colonies. While these colonies are made of individual single cells, the different cells can perform specific functions that support the whole. It makes sense that not splitting off completely would be an evolutionary boon so these specialized cells can perform their function while being part of a larger organism. And as a side note, what exactly do you mean by non-reproducing to reproducing? Single-celled organisms reproduce by splitting apart, resulting in two copies of themselves. Sharing of genetic information will allow beneficial mutations to pass through a population much quicker, which over time results in more sophisticated and specialized organs for reproduction. This, over many generations, will lead to the greatest human recreational and bonding activity ever. Boning.
Bone! Bone!
Well, these days, it's either that or playing Fortnite. And as for your last point, are you asking how do we develop a conscience or become conscious of our surroundings and ourselves? If you're asking how we developed a conscience, well, I'll get into that later when answering your last question. But the short answer is that we developed a conscience because our ancestors thrived when they worked together. Evolving the ability to care about, and not harming, the others in our in-group strengthened the bonds that humans had for one another. If you're asking how we're conscious of ourselves and what's around us, that's also an evolved survival technique. Being aware that we're distinct beings means we're more likely to protect and care for ourselves, giving a better chance to survive and breed. Even animals are aware of themselves as distinct beings. The mirror test, where you put a dot on an animal where they can't see it and place a mirror in front of them, shows that they'll attempt to remove the dot from themselves, not from the image they see in the mirror, showing they're conscious of themselves as a unique individual.
Where did stuff come from? The materialist problem. Is there a source of stuff, matter, energy, or is there no source, and therefore eternal? And if eternal, why are things not completely uniform, according to the apparent laws of thermodynamics? Is there a first cause? Can we know? How do you keep getting asked this question and not scream every time, the Big Bang is not related to evolution?
Thanks for staying on script, sweetie. But she is right.
As always.
Can't argue with that. While we don't know where the stuff that made up the universe came from, we can observe that the stuff is here, and for biological reproducing organisms, the structure that stuff will take will change over generations. Currently, we don't know what caused the initial expansion of the universe. We have some hypotheses, but we can be sure that at some point it occurred. Several observations align with what we would expect to see if the universe at some point in the past 13 billion years or so had a massive expansion of heat and energy. The background radiation, the fact that every galaxy appears moving apart from one another, and the amount of deuterium found in the universe all point to a rapidly expanding, then cooling universe. We may never know for sure what caused it, but we can be sure that it happened at some point in the past. I don't know which law of thermodynamics you're referring to. If you mean the second, which says that as a closed system uses energy, entropy increases, and that energy will slowly be lost, then eventually, yes, we will reach uniformity. In several trillion years, the universe will experience heat death, and there will no longer be, well, anything. Which brings up the question, what can we as average citizens do about that? What's often misunderstood is the Earth isn't a closed system. Here on Earth, we're fighting entropy while the sun loses energy. As we gain energy from external sources, like the sun, those sources lose more energy than we gain. Fortunately for us, the sun has so much mass and potential energy that what it loses compared to its current mass is small enough that it will keep producing energy for billions of years before going dark.
What is good? The moral question. This is the question that all the atheists I've talked to are obsessed over. Every essay context is how to be good without God. I still haven't seen a convincing argument, and in fact, I have a growing conviction that evolutionism is, in fact, not only amoral but immoral. I'm glad we don't consistently apply the maxims of the survival of the fittest.
What people consider good varies from person to person. For me, I think good is doing what I can to reduce harm in the world. I suspect, but I don't want to assume, that for you, good is following the dictates of your deity. In the end, it's all subjective. But to get to your later point, how can evolution be immoral? It is simply that those best suited to survive and thrive are more likely to survive and thrive. Yes, we may not like it, but that's like saying gravity is immoral because falling down hurts people. Survival of the fittest doesn't mean the strongest or most cruel, but simply the best suited to take advantage of their environment will thrive. Humans, as social tool users, evolved the ability to learn empathy and rough moral guidelines. A society where people are empathetic to others, feeling, I don't like to get hurt, so I'd feel bad if others in my in-group got hurt, will thrive over a society where it's simply everyone for themselves. This empathy is what helped us develop a conscience, and cooperating with others, that is, living in a society, is beneficial, and that we shouldn't harm others if we don't want to be harmed either. Sadly, not everybody has the same levels of empathy, and some will try to break the social rules and indiscriminately harm others to further their own agenda. That's why laws are needed, for those that lack empathy and don't care about harming others to get ahead.